The Reserve Bank's Monetary Policy Committee is meeting in Pretoria this week to decide on interest rates. During the last meeting in November, the central bank raised the benchmark lending rate for the first time in nearly 3 years. The ANC this weekend said the SARB needs to be more flexible and consider unemployment and economic growth in its decision-making. We're now joined from our Durban studio by economist Professor Bonke Dumisa. Good afternoon to you, Prof. Are we in for a rates hike?
No, this is one of the easiest tasks for me. The Monetary Policy Committee is not going to increase the repo rate for 3 reasons.
What are those reasons?
The rand has stabilized a lot as it is trading under 14 rands to the dollar, and we buy our crude oil in US dollars. So, which means then that the inflationary pressures are lower. And then when you consider that the latest CPI figure released in December or November showed that the inflation was not going up, then there is no reason for the Monetary Policy Committee to increase the repo rate. And lastly, with the United States Federal Reserve Bank's chairperson, Jerome Powell, he has said they are not going to be keen to increase the repo rates, the interest rates in the United States. And South Africa normally takes its cue from the United States. So when the United States says that they're not keen to increase the repo rates this year, so South Africa will not have that pressure to try and match the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank.
I want to talk to you about something that I referenced in the lead up to our conversation. The ANC saying at that manifesto launch at the weekend that the Reserve Bank needs to perhaps be more flexible and pay more attention to issues of unemployment and economic growth. Is the party on the money here? Are they right?
I think that was really political talk. The South African president and the Minister of Finance met separately with the chairperson of the IMF, and they discussed this whole thing about the independence of the Reserve Bank. And one of the things that the Reserve Bank is in charge of is dealing with the monetary policy, and strictly the monetary policy. The other issues like employment, those are dealt with by the other agencies. So really for the Reserve Bank to start tracking unemployment does not make sense. However, as I've argued here before, if ever you increase the repo rate unnecessarily when you could avoid doing that, that does increase the cost of doing business. And we know that if the cost of doing business increases, then that does affect employment rates. But I don't think that the South African Reserve Bank is any unduly worried about those statements. You do have some political statements and real statements.
The ANC's head of economic policy, Enoch Godongwana, has spoken about an intention, at least, or a wish by the ANC to better coordinate monetary and fiscal policy as far as their vision for the Reserve Bank. Where would the harm be in that?
There is no problem. In fact, there must always be a link between what the left-hand side is doing with the right-hand side in South Africa and in the world. And when we're talking about financial management, however, when they say the fiscal management and the monetary policy must talk to each other, you do have a situation where you are saying to entities and departments that they must go on cost containment. When you are saying they must go on cost containment and the Reserve Bank goes out and increases the repo rate unnecessarily, that increases the costs. And you cannot have cost containment when the inflation rate is actually going up and the cost of doing business are going down. So that's why then the two sides must talk to each other without necessarily the other arms of the Minister of Finance unduly influencing the decisions of the Monetary Policy Committee.
Is it your view then, Professor Bonke Dumisa, that the level of communication at the moment between the Reserve Bank and Treasury is sufficient?
It is sufficient. In fact, I think it's for that reason that the Minister of Finance, Mr. Tito Mboweni, has really spoken out loudly and publicly about some of the statements that we've heard from some of the ANC people over the past weekend on this whole issue about the possible or the planned nationalization of the South African Reserve Bank. It is uncalled for to start discussing those things now before July.
Why is it uncalled for? What would be so bad about nationalizing the Reserve Bank if, as some are saying, it would help the Reserve Bank move at a pace and a position that would be beneficial for the broader South African public, in particular the poor? Is that an economically sound argument?
I think it's not a question of thinking. I am stating it, that that's a very ill-informed position, because we do have banks in South Africa which are there to deal with issues like that. You have the Development Bank of Southern Africa, we have the IDC, etc. Those are the arms of government that deals with lending to small businesses, etc. The Reserve Bank is there to ensure that the monetary policy of the Minister of Finance is properly dealt with, and the Reserve Bank is the sole entity which deals with that. Let us not cloud the issues and start bringing to the Reserve Bank things which are not necessarily part of their mandate. And that is not really exclusive to South Africa. In many countries, the central bank deals with the monetary policy issues only. And that makes it easy to monitor the movement of money in order to make sure then that you don't have unnecessary increase in the money supply, which then becomes inflationary. And I think the Reserve Bank does a very good job at that. I may differ with them sometimes on certain issues, but they are doing a good job, and they've got the best of the cream of people we can have to deal with our monetary policy issues in South Africa. Where
do you differ with the Reserve Bank, Professor? Where do you think the bank could do better?
I think the only thing I've had a problem with the South African Reserve Bank is that sometimes they become too over enthusiastic about this thing of pushing the repo rate. I mean, for example, at the last time we had the figures that the inflation rate, the CPI, was at about 5.1%, but they were saying they are looking long term, and they increased the rate unnecessarily. And as a result of that, many people who could afford at that particular level found that after the increase of that repo rate, then they could no longer afford because of that 25 basis point increase, which could have been avoided. Those are the things then that the Reserve Bank must take care of. They must not always try to match the USA in terms of the interest rates, because the interest rates must not be pushed just to increase the bond yields and the real interest rates in South Africa. The Reserve Bank is not there in the position to increase money which flows into South Africa for the sake of coming to South Africa, and it's not going to be used for fixed direct investments.
I want to pick your brain on something else, Professor Dumisa, before we let you go. This idea that those who are calling for the nationalization of the Reserve Bank would expose the National Bank, or the Reserve Bank, I should say, to some sort of capture. Is that an exaggeration or a well-warranted fear?
There is an element of truth in that, because, as I've said, yes, many of us are not happy about some of the shareholders being based in Germany and countries like that, where they don't really care about South Africa. But the point is, the private shareholders at the South African Reserve Bank have absolutely no say on our monetary policy in South Africa. It is the Reserve Bank which deals with that, and the people at the Reserve Bank are appointed by the Minister of Finance and the President of South Africa. So I think people want the Reserve Bank to be diluted for other reasons other than what they are stating in public. The Reserve Bank must not be turned into a commercial bank which lends to the SMMEs, etc. The Reserve Bank is not there to lend money to businesses. The Reserve Bank is there to make sure that our monetary policy in South Africa is sound, and that's why many global markets believe in South African Reserve Bank.
Professor Bonke Dumisa joining us live from Durban. Thank you so much for your time.